T2 Trainspotting, or Trainspotting 2, is the sequel to the original British cult classic Trainspotting that came out back in 1996 and really changed the game, because Trainspotting was really unlike anything else. It was essentially a black comedy, but it was also like a kind of crime drama almost as well. It was basically a film that dealt with drug culture and focused on these characters, the kind of characters that movies never really kind of focus on. So it was very different, and obviously the style of filmmaking that Danny Boyle employed and what he brought to that film really set it apart kind of visually and stylistically from anything else at the time. And it's still very radical and new and just raw watching it today. And there's a lot of fans of the original. Obviously I was never the biggest fan of the original. I think it's a great film. It's definitely a cult classic for sure, one of the best British films of the last 20 or so years, definitely. But I was never personally the biggest fan of the film. It's not really my kind of film. I mean, I like black comedies. It's not really a straight up black comedy. There are elements of dark humour there, but I was never that big of a fan of the original Trainspotting. However, this new Trainspotting film really intrigued me. I remember seeing the trailer and going, wow, that looks really cool, I really want to check this out. And going into this film, I didn't really know what to expect, because a lot of people that had seen it, it's kind of had a mixed response. I mean, more positive than negative, but a lot of people have come out going, it was okay, it wasn't as good as the original, it was alright, or they just didn't really like it, or didn't think it was that great, or was nowhere near as good as the original. But for me personally, I actually like this one more than the original. Now, I think the original film is definitely the better film, for sure, but I actually kind of enjoyed this film I liked it more than the original, funny enough, and I think I'm going to be really in the minority here, because I think the majority of people like the original way more, and the majority of people think this one is just okay, or it's not that great. I thought this film was great, and I really loved it. I might have liked it even more than the original. I liked it so much. I was worried it would be like a kind of rip-off or just a rehash of the first film, but what I liked so much about this film, and what Danny Boyle brought to this film, is that he could have so easily have just done the same thing again. That's what we see from a lot of these kind of sequels, like when there's a 20-year gap, like Independence Day, for example. I don't think Independence Day was horrendous, but it was basically just the same thing, just bigger, more action, more effects, and they didn't really do anything different, really. Not successfully anyway. But with Trainspotting, what Danny Boyle brought to this film is that it was a very different film to the original. There's similarities for sure, it's not a radically different film, but it's not the exact same thing. It's not an exact replica or rehash of the original Trainspotting, and that's what I really liked about it. I think a lot of people are going into this film and are disappointed because it's kind of different and it's not the exact same thing as the first film, because, you know, the first film was just this raw, unleashed, just frenetic, hyperkinetic film, and this film doesn't really have that. I mean, it has it in parts. It's still got that same style of filmmaking from Danny Boyle. You know, it's got the same kind of visual style to it, but it is a very different kind of film. It's not this kind of raw, unleashed, hyperkinetic, fast-paced, frenetic film. It is a different kind of film, and that's what I really appreciate about this film. That's what I really liked about it, that Danny Boyle did something different. You know, he didn't just do the exact same thing again. For me, I really liked it because it was more of a reflective drama, and that's kind of like more my cup of tea. I like the first film, but it is a bit kind of just full on and intense and relentless. This film, it is more of a reflective drama, really. It's about looking at these characters and how they have kind of changed over the years, how their lives have changed, or whether they've actually stayed the same, and just whether they are looking back on their lives and thinking on whether it's been worth it or whether it's gone that well. And it kind of more reflective and more contemplative in that sense, and that's what I kind of liked about it. It wasn't just full on, fast paced, energetic. That worked really well for the first one when they were in their 20s, but now that they're in their mid to late 40s, I think it worked really well, it being more of a reflective drama than looking back on their lives and seeing where these characters are now 20 years later, how their lives have changed. And I thought that was really well done, and I really liked that about this film. It made it feel more real in a way, because yes, it was nostalgic in a sense, that it was kind of very nostalgic to the 90s, very nostalgic to the past and to their characters' lives, or where they, you know, came from like 20 years ago. But it wasn't overly nostalgic, and that's one of the things I like most about this film. It did pay homage to the original film, but it wasn't just beating it over your head. There were, every time they paid homage to the original film with just a reference or kind of paid visual homage, it was only very short, little short bursts here and there. It never overwhelmed you. It was still very much its own film that stood apart and really worked on its own, but there was these little bits and these little sequences here and there where they often kind of pay homage to the original. And for me, it really worked because it was nostalgic, but nostalgic in a realistic way, and like how you're nostalgic in real life. It's not always like looking at how kind of happy and wonderful everything is. It was almost tragically nostalgic in a way, because it's not necessarily a very happy story, the first film, and how it ended. And I really liked how this second film carried on from where the first one left off. It really is kind of a direct continuation and follow-up to the original, even though there's that 20-year age gap. But for me, that 20-year age gap really served the story well, because it was a really big part of the story. The fact that this is 20 years on, that these characters are 20 years old now, and they're kind of looking back on their lives and thinking, was it worth it? I think it worked really well. How it was different, it stood on its own, it was a different kind of film, but it also paid homage to the original, and these kind of references and visual homages that for me really worked. Another thing I really liked about this film, that it was kind of more life-affirming and uplifting than the original film. And it's not like a really kind of positive, optimistic, uplifting kind of film, but that first film is really kind of relentless and really kind of shows the kind of worst sides of life and the worst kind of people in society, and really put a spotlight on them. This film is more about how these people have aged, and it's kind of about them there's kind of some redemption storylines in part. It's kind of about them trying to get their lives back on track, or trying to kind of make up for past mistakes. And I like that. I kind of relate to that more, in that it's not just this really kind of just relentless downbeat film. It was kind of more life affirming and more uplifting in respect, and I really liked that. I also got more emotionally invested this time than I did the first time round, because it's really hard to kind of connect with those characters and relate to those characters the first film, unless you are like a junkie. But with this film, you kind of can relate to it a bit more, because it's more about these broader, more general kind of universal themes of kind of growing up, looking back in your life, thinking, was it all worth it, reflecting on like past mistakes and things you can really relate to. And because of that, this film for me was more enjoyable to watch, whereas the first film, it's kind of hard to get attached to these characters. This film, I kind of found myself caring for the characters a lot more. I got a lot more emotionally invested and engaged. And of course, I've got to talk about the characters in this review. Mark, Begbie, Sick Boy and Spud. I think the characters are great. They really are the stars of the show, and the actors do such a great job at making us feel like these are the same people from before, but just 20 years on, because it actually has been 20 years for the actors as well. And it's great seeing where some of these characters are the same, some of these characters are still stuck in a rut, like Spud, like Begbie, but some of these characters have kind of like moved on a bit, like Mark's kind of gone on with his life and now he's coming back and trying to kind of help his friends and sort things out. And it's great seeing how all these characters are in kind of different places. Some of them are in the same place, some of them have moved on, and it was really great, and it was kind of more realistic in that sense. All the actors are really great as well. Ewan McGregor back as Mark. It's great seeing him. It's kind of weird actually, because obviously the first time around that was his big breakout role when he was in his like early 20s, and now he's like a really kind of seasoned, experienced actor, and it was cool to see what he could bring to the character now, 20 years on, now more experienced, now older. That was really cool. Jonny Lee Miller as Sick Boy as well, I think he was great. Spud's really great as well, even though he's kind of sidelined a bit. We don't really get that much of Spud, kind of like the first one. But for me, the star of the show in this is Begbie, and I was really surprised at that, because I didn't think Begbie was going to have as big a role as he did. It really kind of is his film, because the first film, it's really Mark's film, it's really about his story. This film, funny enough, it's kind of Begbie's story. It really kind of starts and ends with Begbie, and it's really about his story in a sense. I didn't think we were going to get as much Begbie as we did, and Robert Carlyle was just so great in that role. He really is a great actor, because he's actually obviously not like that at all in real life, and you see him in the film and you really genuinely believe he is that kind of psychopathic, crazy kind of serial killer character, and he does a great job in the role. And there's some great scenes between him and Mark, when he's kind of angry about what he did in the first film. The story was really great as well, because it was respectful to the first film, and it really did feel like a direct continuation from where the first film left off. But as I said, because of that 20-year age gap, the characters are in very different places now, and a lot of things have happened over the years. It doesn't just feel like an unnecessary sequel, it really feels like it's warranted because of that 20-year gap. I don't think this film would have worked as nearly as well if it was just a year later, or even 10 years later. I think the 20-year gap actually really, in this case, made the film what it was. I think it really worked because of that 20-year age gap, and they were still able to do a follow-up and continuation from where the first film left off, but the 20-year age gap really served the story well, I thought. And of course, I've got to talk about the direction by Danny Boyle. He's really what makes these films. Obviously, he's the unseen face behind the camera, but his direction and what he brings to this film with kind of his trademark visual style, kind of the same thing as what he brought to the original film. It's not exactly the same as the original film in this, but there are some kind of like similarities in terms of how it is filmed, the whole style of it from a visual perspective. I really like the camera work, how Danny Boyle puts the camera in really different, interesting, unique places that you wouldn't really see the camera in any other film, where it's kind of like really up close to an actor, or it's at some kind of weird Dutch kind of tilt angle. It keeps the film feeling fresh and interesting, because even if you're not totally on board with the film or fully sucked into it, because of the camera's constantly in these new and different places, and because there's constantly things going on from a visual point of view, you can never get bored or lose interest, because there's always something cool, different and interesting going on screen for you to look at. And that's what I liked about this film, what Danny Boyle brought to this film. He didn't just make it a really safe, boring, generic film. He did the same kind of thing that he did before in terms of how he filmed it and the whole visual style of it, and I really liked that. And of course, the choices of music. Obviously, the original was very well known for its music choices, and there's some great music in here. I'm not really a big music guy myself, but I do like music and listen to music occasionally. There's some great choices of music in here. I loved all the music. There's some callbacks to the original songs in the first film, but the callbacks, they're never like really kind of deliberate or bashing you over your head. They kind of just appear occasionally every now and then. But there's some great new original choices of music in here. The song from the trailer, which I love, also comes into play right near the end of the film. I was worried that wasn't going to be in the film, but right near the end of the film, it comes in and it worked really well. And so yeah, I couldn't say more positive things about the music. And there's also a really great kind of silent tribute to David Bowie. A lot of people might not pick up on it, but it's while Mark's flipping through his old records, we see David Bowie on, and all of a sudden the sound just cuts off. It's a very quiet scene, he's just flipping through the records, but when we actually see David Bowie, it just goes silent and there's no sound in it. Well, it really hit me, but it was a really great, touching and very tasteful tribute to David Bowie, I thought, and I really liked how they did that. As far as negatives go, Spud was kind of sidelined a bit, like in the first film, which was a little disappointing. I mean, he gets stuff to do, he's in the film quite a bit, but even though when we're reintroduced to his character, there's a great kind of redemption storyline set up, I was like, oh, we're going to really explore kind of Spud kind of redeeming himself and getting off drugs and all that, but then that's kind of just really brushed aside and forgotten about. And then he has this other kind of storyline about writing stories, and I was like, okay, and he kind of pops up every now and then, but he's not really involved in the main storyline with the other characters. Every now and then he pops in and out, but he just felt detached from the rest of the characters and the main storyline for me. I don't know, it kind of felt a little bit sidelined. I did like the part that he played, and he did have stuff to do. It's just he felt a little bit pushed to the side for me and didn't really feel like he was involved in the main storyline as much as maybe I wanted him to. And also, this isn't really a major thing really, but we don't really get that much from the supporting characters. So the supporting characters from the first film, a few of them come back, like Mark's dad, like Gail, Kelly Macdonald I think it is, she comes back briefly, but a lot of them are just in kind of cameos. And I like the fact that they came back only for a brief period of time, so they were still there and we're still aware they're here in this world, in these characters' lives still, but we really don't get much from them at all. It would have been nice to see, maybe, I like the fact that they focus mainly on the kind of main characters, but it would have been nice to see a little bit more from the supporting characters like the first time, because in this film they're there, but they kind of just reduced to cameos, which is a little disappointing, so we don't really get to see it from kind of their point of view. We only got to see it from the main character's point of view. So I suppose we could have seen a little bit more from the supporting characters. Overall, T2 Trainspotting isn't quite as great as the original, it doesn't quite hit the heights of the original, but for me, I really enjoyed this film, and I think it still delivered a great sequel to the British cult classic. With just the right amount of nostalgia blended with a fresh and different take on the characters that we've grown to love, for me, T2 Trainspotting is a more than worthy follow-up and a great companion piece to the original. I'm going to give T2 Trainspotting 4 stars. And there we have it, that wraps up my review of T2 Trainspotting. Have you seen the film yet? And if so, what do you think about it? Let me know in the comments down below. And as always, if you like this and you haven't already, be sure to click subscribe to see more. But for now, I've been David O'Sullivan. I'll see you next time.